You have entry-level salaries starting at $70,000. You don't need a tech background. You don't need a college degree. You actually can come in and do most of the training for free online. Pre-2023, 70% of our members would land jobs, their first job at a consultancy, and about 30% would land their first job at some internal role direct for the company. And now in the back half of 2023 and now in 2024, we saw the exact inverse. We are seeing 70% go to internal companies and 30% of our talent going to the Salesforce consultancies.
Welcome to Salesforce Radio, your destination for insights, news, and community connections within the dynamic Salesforce ecosystem.
Bradley Rice, welcome to Salesforce Radio. Pleasure to speak with you today. As a way of introduction, I'll just mention that, from speaking to you over the years and seeing your content, one of the main, I would say, advocates for Salesforce admins that are starting out, and also people who have been in it a couple of years and are looking to make sure that they're getting, the best opportunities in the best possible places. So really nice to have you on today, and excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here. I'm excited to come on. It's always fun to talk to the Salesforce ecosystem about, what we're seeing, trends in the Salesforce space, especially when it comes to careers. And I know, the last, I'd say 12 months have been interesting in the sort of career paths as far as, you used to be able to just dive in and land a job, trip and fall, and you get a job because you wrote a clever LinkedIn post. And now you've actually got to, go toe to toe a bit. And I think it's become more interesting for the career seekers. I wouldn't say as fun as just hopping in and getting jobs, but it's definitely more interesting to really, put your skills to the test and get the jobs and sort of demand your spot.
So I've seen you, post a lot in the past about your journey a little bit, but I'd love to just kind of get a bit of a background into your journey into tech, your journey into Salesforce, and then how Talent Stacker came to be. And I also saw that you guys had a really cool event. Was it 2 weekends ago? Love to hear about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll give you the quick rundown. I've got crazy long versions of this that I've accidentally spilled out, where I just can't stop talking. So I'll do better to consolidate it for you. So my Salesforce career was basically, I came out of college. I did fairly well in college. Learning in that environment came pretty easy to me. I'm an auditory learner, so if I just pay attention in class, I'll do okay, as long as everything's covered. So school was good. I thought I was just going to come out. I had an economics degree coupled with an education degree. And I just wanted to be a high school teacher. And my long-term goal was to be a high school teacher who taught economics, because I really enjoyed like personal finance and that kind of thing. So I came out of school. I thought I'd just hop into a job. I'd done a 1-year unpaid internship through local schools and things like that. I was like, man, I'm ready. And I could not find a job. I applied for, this was in 2011. So teaching jobs weren't as, I'll say, easy or available to get as they are today. So I came out and I applied for every school within 60 miles of my home. This was in West Georgia. I sent emails to every single principal, every school board of those local school districts. I tried everything to get their attention. I got one response, and it was just basically, we're not looking for anybody right now, but we'll keep you on the list. And I'll tell you too, I didn't follow up with any of those people because I tripped and fell into a Salesforce role, but they never followed up. I never finally had like people reaching out saying like, hey, we're ready. We've got some availability. It never happened. So I ended up having to pivot because at the time I'd taken a job making less than $8 an hour working at a local bank in like the operations department and doing some, like, they called it financial advising. It was not financial advising. It was advising people to get into whatever they said I should tell them to get into, but it wasn't based on like my actual abilities or understanding of a market. All that to say, I had no clue what was going on. I thought I knew everything, had absolutely no clue how to get a job. And I applied for anything and everything around me and ended up getting a Salesforce junior admin job. Did not know what Salesforce was. Had a lot of great mentors who said, just like, stick it out. It was tough for like the first 3 months. I was kind of thinking about quitting. And fortunately, my wife said, hey, look, you've got a salary. It was only like $30,000. But she was like, look, you have a salary, you have a 401k, like you've got nothing better going for you. Like, just stick it out. And I stuck it out. And after about 9 months, so 6 months later, things started to click. And I was like, man, I got it. Okay, I can do this. I see how these dots are connecting. This was long before Trailhead or anything like that. So I had no training, right? So this is like somebody, think about you learning Salesforce, and then 3 months later, like you hear about it on a podcast like this, and you're like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And then 3 months later, you're probably still going to feel pretty lost. So that was the journey for me. But I had, like I said, great mentorship. People said, hey, look, this is a career. It's not a job. Long story short, ended up moving up into a solution architect role. That was a couple of jobs later with a consulting firm. Made great money there, 6 figures. That was awesome for me. I was about 20, probably 23, 24 years old. And then I started my own consultancy when I was 27. And when I was 31, I started Talent Stacker. So it's sort of been this journey of going from junior admin to solution architect to starting my own consultancy to giving that up to lean into helping other people start Salesforce careers. And that was really a passion project where I was like, maybe I can make a few bucks on the side while I do the Salesforce consulting stuff by helping other people land jobs. But it went way better than expected. And it was far more rewarding for me to help people in that aspect. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, leaned into it. And Talent Stacker was sort of birthed from following that trajectory.
Well, that was definitely pretty concise, but I think I've got some questions. So
yeah, for sure.
So you're in college studying econ. That's your passion. You want to be a teacher. Was there ever, hey, maybe I should learn coding. Maybe I should go into high tech? I mean, what did you ever have that feeling? And then when you got to be a, junior Salesforce admin, what did it feel like you were doing in the beginning there? What did you think the job even was?
Yeah, those are both great questions. So number one, no, tech wasn't really on my radar. Like I wasn't a tech person. Like I played video games and I enjoyed that, but I didn't see myself working with a computer. So for context, I grew up on a cattle farm. So I got my first computer when I was 17. And it wasn't a huge deal to me. So you're talking about like 17 to 21. I really only used a computer to do schoolwork in college. So it wasn't like tech was part of my life or that I was like latched onto it. So really what I was considering was just going back to school and getting a master's degree. It was like, look, everybody says master's is the new bachelor's and you can't get a job if you don't have a master's degree. So I was like, I don't know what to do. I mean, I can't get a job out here. So maybe I'll just go back to school. And I was still well connected with the school and a lot of people who had decided to move on and stay in school. So I had a lot of connections. They were like, hey, come on, do this. Like the water's warm. And ultimately decided not to. It was really, I was applying for all these jobs. And I had this company at the time, they were called Greenway Medical Technologies out in West Georgia. And the guy calls me and he says, hey, I've got one question for you. I'm going to ask you an interview question. I've got one question. And he just said, what is a business process? Like describe a business process to me. And I did my best. I was really taken aback. I was like, I didn't like, aren't you supposed to ask me like what my biggest strength is or weakness or something like? And so I did my best. I thought I blew it, but they long story short, they ended up giving me a call and the guy said, hey, look, I don't have a problem teaching people technology. I have a problem teaching them to understand how to think about how businesses function and what the business needs are and those kind of things. And you did a much better job answering that question than a lot of technical people do. And I don't have a problem teaching you the technical side. I can put you on some, materials, give you a few books and let you shadow our team. But I don't really want to teach you how to understand how do we generate leads? How do we nurture those? How do we get those into a sales funnel? How do we support those once they've purchased or upsell them or whatever else? Like, I'm glad you already seem to understand those things. And I think, maybe some of that came from the business degree. But, it really took me down that path of, I guess, being able to get into the right job with the right person who understood what I needed. And they just, it was exactly that. There was a developer, there was a business analyst, and there was a senior admin, and there's the director of business services at the company. And to answer your second question, what did I think I was doing? I was pretty confused. They had hired me to be a Salesforce developer. We had this orientation call where they mapped out where everybody fit in at the company. Like we had just new hire orientation. So I was there with new salespeople, new support people, new HR people, and I was in the business services department. And they showed us where everything mapped out, but there was this really confusing part where it was like, you're in the business services department. And what that means is you sort of support the whole business and its processes. And I'm like, I still don't know what you're talking about, right? Like, I don't know what you mean. And only through what I consider really good onboarding practice where I would do, I don't remember the days of the week, but I know I would shadow the developer one day, the analyst one day, the admin one day. I would train all day one day. And then the other day, I would actually go to all the meetings with the director of business services. And so I would go meet with accounting for an hour, meet with marketing for an hour, meet with sales for an hour, meet with support for an hour. And all they were doing was just barraging him with all of their needs. Where are these projects? We need this automation in place. We need these new fields, like all these things. And he would take those back to the team. and then delegate it out to the team. And I didn't understand the lingo. I didn't understand what they were saying. But a few months in, and that was those first 3 months, right? I was dying. I was like, I don't know what to do. This is tough. I feel like I'm sitting in meetings, not understanding a word that's being said. And slowly but surely, though, it came together. I ended up getting my admin certification. So I was starting to understand Salesforce. And hindsight 2020, the senior admin at the company, her name was Stacy Hyatt. She's still in the Salesforce space, I think over at Cloud Code right now. And she would sit down with me. She'd pull out this marker board every now and then when she could tell I couldn't understand something. She would sit down with me and she'd map it out. Like I remember her teaching me about record types and page layouts. And it finally clicked. Like I couldn't understand why you would create a field, but it wouldn't display to the users because it was not on that page layout or whatever. And she's explaining like, not everybody needs to see this field. This is why that would actually get in the way and hinder them and those kind of things. And sometimes those light bulb moments, really carried me forward. But getting the certification gave me a lot of, I think, confidence that like, not a dummy, I can do this. I've got the same cert that other professionals have. And then after about, like I said earlier, about 9 months is when I started to really realize like tickets would come in and I could handle them myself or maybe just ask a couple of questions to the senior. And I realized like, I'm going to be able to do this. Like if I keep my head down, I'm going to be able to actually excel at this and not just have a job. So that was kind of the direction. And finally, I figured out what we were actually doing at work and supporting all of these departments and using Salesforce as the platform that made the machine that is the company run. But it took a little while to figure out how all that went together.
That's really interesting. And one of the things I'm hearing also from this story is that there was a big advantage actually in joining a bit of a more established kind of large organization where you had these other resources and people. And one of the things I think we're seeing today, and maybe you have a different opinion, is that places are looking for a Salesforce admin and they want the Salesforce admin to have all of these, requirements and they want to have this whole background that they've been around for all these years. But in reality, they've got no other team supporting that person necessarily. And it's really hard to then jump into that. And they kind of want, it's like an entry level position, but they want someone who's already been through all the ropes, but they don't really have anything to support, someone like that. After that, did you end up staying in kind of larger companies with tech teams, or did you go to smaller? Did you ever work in anything smaller?
Yeah. So I want to touch on the one thing you mentioned, which is absolutely true. And that is that, companies are trying to hire talent and they've been burned so many times. Like I get why they're putting like 2 to 3 years experience for an entry level talent. Not that they should, but I understand why they're doing it. And it's because of how many times they've hired someone truly entry level because they had a certification or two. And then they come in and they just really don't know how to function in the business, or they really don't even know what to do inside of Salesforce. Like you put them in a production org. I'll tell like a sort of an aside story. Me and my daughter play video games a lot. And the game that we're into right now is Fortnite. And we've been playing. It's fun. We've been doing really well in sort of what I would call like exhibition play. So it's just like free for all online with other people, all skill levels. A lot of fun. And we played in our first tournament a couple of weeks ago. And she was scared to death. And I was like, no, just play the way you play. Like play to your, like the way you've been trained, the way that you've been working on your strategies and how you play. And because it was a tournament, nothing different, but this was live. This was the real thing, right? She did what we call like camping. She just like got a couple of, weapons and then she hid in a corner and just hoped to make it through the match. And that's never going to work as a strategy. And it really just like the reason that came up is because it's interesting when you're working in Trailhead and you're doing your thing and you get your certification, you feel so good about yourself. You're on LinkedIn or you're in your community groups and everybody's lifting you up. And you're like, man, I am good, right? Like I'm awesome at this. And you get your job and everybody's patting you on the back. And then you get into the live environment and you try to camp in the corner. And hopefully nobody asks you to do anything. And hopefully you can figure this out without anybody finding out that you actually don't know what you're doing. And like all those things come, right? And it's like, once you put yourself in the fire, you start to realize like, okay, maybe I could be humbled a bit. Like maybe there is way more to this than I ever could have imagined. And I'm still at the very, very tip of the iceberg on this thing. And that's true. And I think what happens is a lot of those professionals, they come in and they get that first job and suddenly they get really scared and they don't want to speak up and they don't want to raise their hand. They don't want to be the one to push back on an idea or a request, or when somebody calls them in and says, hey, we need your insight as our Salesforce administrator to help guide this conversation for how we're going to implement this new process. And they're not ready for that conversation, right? And a lot of that is why we created Talent Stacker. Like I look and I would say the typical person who graduates from our program is me in my career path with somewhere between 12 and 18 months of experience. So by the time they come out of this very targeted training program, they are already at that 1 to 1.5 year mark. from someone who maybe learned on Trailhead, got a certification, joined a community group, got a job. So it's a very different entry level person. I would still definitely call them entry level, but I think we noticed that the entry level market got tougher to compete in. And part of that, it's kind of like, man, I hate that it's not as easy as it always, or not that it always was, but that we had experienced before. And I hate that it's not as easy, but also at the same time, these companies need qualified professionals to enter into their teams, and easy isn't always good for the market. And sometimes we need it to be a little more competitive so we can actually get qualified talent into these companies so that they can be successful with Salesforce, so that they can expand their use of Salesforce, so that they can hire bigger teams, so that we can actually see healthy growth in the space and not people just wandering in who really don't know what they're doing, but they interviewed well and they got a certification. So I just wanted to touch on that for a moment. If you don't mind reminding me the question you were leading me into, because obviously by now I've forgotten.
Oh yeah, of course I completely forgot it too. And I'm thinking of other things. I'm
Awesome.
thinking right now of stage fright. It's like someone they rehearse with their theater group or whatever, and then they get to that that final play. They get out there, and then all of a sudden they're, oh my gosh, these people are looking at me. And what I'm thinking about it in this whole thing is that also one of the really amazing things about the ecosystem is that how big it is, right? And sometimes, and I was speaking of that in another podcast with someone, you kind of forget that like the entire purpose, it's easy to forget your purpose in the Salesforce ecosystem, that it's actually to support businesses to like run certain processes and not just be in the system, right? And as someone who, sells a solution for Salesforce to very technical people, oftentimes, they sometimes have a hard time translating, how this solution is really going to help the end user, which it's interesting because that's the purpose of the job, right? But sometimes people forget that the solution that they're looking to solve for is a real business solution. It's not just something technical, right? It's not just something that's in the system. It's not just making the life of, myself easier as the implementer, but actually making the life of the user easier. And what will happen sometimes is people come to me and they'll say, hey, they're trying to solve something for something technical. As I said, like they're looking to, solve for some sort of form or a document, some sort of business process. But the opportunity that they see is really for themselves as a technical, user, as the person who's setting it up, rather than the end user. And then they bring it to the business. The business is like, why would I pay for some, software when, we're already getting the job done? And they're like sweating because they're like, oh my gosh, I totally missed the whole point here. I was trying to save myself, all this time and money and resources and the company, but they don't understand how much work I'm putting in. And I think that's like kind of one of the things is that, if you get stuck in Trailhead and you get stuck just in the back end of Salesforce, you can lose sight of kind of what's going on in the business. And I guess when you're in a smaller organization and you've got, not so many people managing the Salesforce, you really need to make sure that you're able to interface with the business. You really need to make sure that you're able to, translate things over. And obviously, you're not going to really learn that from just learning Salesforce. That's where like your first employer said, that's something you have to learn, somewhere else, whether it's in your family's, store, wherever it is in school. And that was one of the cool things when I initially joined the ecosystem, which was in 2020, was seeing all these, success stories of people coming from the service industry and stuff like that. And talking about how their skills really were able to transfer over, like, just like you said, like the technical part they could learn. Part they couldn't learn was how to make the lives of the people that they were serving easier.
Yeah.
And that's always kind of the cool thing about it, having such a big community and you can feel like you're within it. But then you have to realize, hey, the community's here to serve like all these businesses that use Salesforce.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Like with those transferable skills, like we saw a lot of people coming out of healthcare, education. Recently, we've seen a lot coming out of nonprofit backgrounds. But you can really think of anything. And you're exactly right. It's because you take somebody that was a nurse that transferred into being a Salesforce professional and you put them on a healthcare project. And you got them sitting in there asking questions to a team that works at a hospital about how we're going to implement, maybe it's Health Cloud, maybe it's not for the company. And man, that person's ability to carry that conversation and understand the nuances of what's going on there and sort of scaffold that knowledge over to say like, oh yeah, you're working on this process for these people. That's a really cool thing that you're doing. Like, I wish we'd had that when I was, working in that space. And yeah, that'd be really cool. Did you think about this? Did you think about that? And then like helping them build out the idea versus sitting there. And I've been here a lot. I think a lot of consultants have been in this space where half the battle on a consulting project is learning what this business even actually does. I worked for companies like Liberty Tax, and just understanding like it wasn't even about the taxes. It was about operating basically just like a massive group of companies that are spread out across all these owners across the country. And it was less about taxes and it was more about putting the processes in place for a franchise business and how that was going to function when you had one Salesforce org to delegate out to 1,000 independently owned companies across the country. Like that got really confusing. And I don't know that, many people would have that background to say like, oh yeah, I've worked in, massive franchises that use Salesforce as like a header platform for all these companies across the country. And, also working in I worked in software, I worked in manufacturing from like signs to air filters. I worked in healthcare, just all these different industries. And I really liked what Salesforce did here in the last few years of making the consultancies more industry specific to a degree and sort of separating out the clouds to try to drive specifics into the industry. Because for me as a consultant, it would have been really cool to have been able to niched into an industry vertical versus coming into these businesses and being like, yeah, I'll meet with you at your sign shop and talk to you about how we're going to implement Salesforce to help your team. Like, first, let me understand how your business even functions. Like, what do y'all do? What do you sell? How do you market? Like, what's going on here? It's very difficult to take that through. And I've seen people coming, especially from like the nonprofit background recently, where they can just jump right into these consulting companies and give value immediately. And yeah, they've only got a couple of certifications and maybe 100 hours of project work on a, simulated project or something like that. But at the end of the day, they've got this background in fundraising and donations and the struggles of nonprofits and what they've seen nonprofits do really, really well. And then they come in and work in these orgs and they've got incredible industry knowledge to bring to the table, which a lot of Salesforce professionals have very little industry knowledge that they're trying to figure out how to give industry specific advice into a Salesforce org. And a lot of times that the results are not good when nobody on that team actually understands the type of company they're working for.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and especially about the nonprofit piece, because I speak to a lot of people who, are like admins for nonprofits, or became an admin for a nonprofit just out of divine providence because they ended up there. They started with some job, they worked their way up, and they're like, oh, now you're going to manage our Salesforce system, and it's really interesting because you see people who are a lot of times strapped for resources, figuring out great solutions to problems that they have in the organizations. And obviously, nonprofit's a huge space, right? It's all different types of things. And especially with Salesforce, it could be anything from a very small foundation to like some giant organization that's writing millions of dollars in grants. But one of the cool things I've seen is, people going from, the for-profit world to the nonprofit world, from the nonprofit world to the for-profit world, and the amount of knowledge that they can bring. Just spoke to someone recently from Australia, and she came from nonprofit. Now all of a sudden she was working in this company where they do like gambling machines. And she was telling me all about all these different things that she was able to take from what she had done in nonprofits and bring it in there and then apply it to Salesforce, and also how they use the systems differently. And it also just goes to show you just how flexible Salesforce is, how it can be used in so many different ways, support so many different business processes. A lot of times we're not even talking about salespeople, right? Like salespeople, which it's not even the main use case at this point for Salesforce, which I find also, pretty interesting and kind of cool how that evolution happened. What are you seeing like in 2024? What do you think some of the trends are in the Salesforce space from a technical perspective? Like, where do you think things are going to go this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll tell you one of the trends we've seen, this emerged, I'll say in the last half of 2023 and going into 2024 has carried. And one of those things is obviously we're focused a lot on people landing their first job in the Salesforce ecosystem. So we have to stay on some of the trends that we see are obviously in that space. And one of those is that we saw a direct flip flop of pre-2023, 70% of our members, give or take, say 10%, 70% of our members would land their first job at a consultancy. And about 30% would land their first job at some internal role direct for the company. And now in the back half of 2023 and now in 2024, we saw the exact inverse. We are seeing 70% go to internal companies, hiring directly for their Salesforce talent, and 30% of our talent going to the Salesforce consultancies. And I could guess at why that's true. I could say that if I had to guess, I would say that probably budgets are tighter at companies. So they're being more thoughtful about their money, giving higher interest rates. So not doing as much of borrowing to pay for big projects. So I think typically they would have just, gone through a big consultancy and paid the consultancy rates and allowed that to continue to happen. But because things were tighter, they looked for alternatives. And one of those alternatives being onboarding and training internally at the company for their internal Salesforce talent. And we've seen quite a bit of that happen. That's one of the things we've noticed, which I believe is also the cause of another massive trend that we've noticed. And I think this trend is actually throwing off a lot of Salesforce, I'll call them thought leaders or influencers or whatever you want to call these people. And what I think is thrown off now is that we're not seeing the same titles that we saw in, say, 2020, 2021. We're not seeing Salesforce admin, Salesforce business analyst, Salesforce developer. Like, we're not seeing those generic titles nearly as much. And what we saw I'll go back, it's the exact same date range. The first half of 2023 and before, you could almost see any set of about 5 to 7 roles were very typical, like solution architect, technical architect, admin, developer, business analyst, maybe something like support specialist or CRM specialist would get tossed in there, something like that. But typically it was the same 5, 6, 7 roles over and over again for at least 80% of the jobs that we saw landed. And then that suddenly took this massive shift because consultancies tend to have a more formatted naming convention. They kind of know how they need to structure the roles to operate the projects that they're going to work. And they hire a bunch of the same thing. Like they'll hire 10 admins and 10 developers and 10 analysts and 10 project managers and those kind of things. But the internal roles are wild. They call people, I don't even know how they come up with these names sometimes, but we've seen it'll be a finance company. So instead of calling them a business analyst, they'll call them a finance analyst. Right. And so now they're not even on LinkedIn. They're not a Salesforce business analyst. They're a financial analyst. And that could be so misconstrued with different things. So now if you look at a survey and you say, going back to thought leaders in the space, it's like, oh no, we're seeing a massive decline in the number of Salesforce admin jobs and the number of Salesforce analyst jobs and the number of Salesforce developer jobs. Like, what's happening? There's a massive just flattening, a saturation, right? What we're seeing is that you could call it a saturation of those titles, but those titles are just being pushed into other role names because the roles are shifting to internal roles. So now I would say that in the last couple of months, which are the ones fresh on my mind, we've had anywhere from 25 to 30 different titles for those same 5, 6, 7 roles. We're now seeing 25 to 30 different role names. It's the same talent, right? It's the same certifications, the same training, the same skills, the same interview prep, landing a massive variety of job titles at this point. So I think those are 2 major trends that we've been seeing is misunderstanding naming convention and why that doesn't necessarily translate to job opportunity, if that makes sense.
So from your perspective, the requirements for these jobs are pretty much the same as they were with the different roles?
Well, we're still doing, I would say 80% of the training we do in 2024 compared to what we did in 2022 is the same training, right? It's very much, it's simulated projects, it's interview prep, it's job search strategies, it's certification training, it's instructor-led workshops, and trying to get as much hands-on experience as possible inside of Salesforce. But at the end of the day, it's effectively the same training process resulting in a massive skew of different job titles. And the only reason we can come up for is seeing that same shift from consulting to internal is because the internal naming conventions are simply they're just not standardized. Yeah.
How do you teach people to find appropriate roles for themselves with all these new naming conventions?
Well, what we've done is we post monthly. So we post our program statistics every single month. And what we started to do is, along with the outcomes like number of people job landed, average salaries, we do salaries by gender, jobs landed by gender. We try to break things out just to sort of keep a pulse on the state of at least the entry level ecosystem. So what we've done is we've now started also sharing all of the unique job titles for those roles. And we've also started sharing whether those are in office, fully remote or hybrid roles. So people can get a better feel for what are the types of titles I should be looking for? What should my expectations be around hybrid, in office, or work from home? And by sharing those, I'm hopeful that people will start really opening their minds to how to search for these jobs. And inside the program, we actually teach them to search for a variety of keywords. And then what they should do is dive in on the job description. And then they're keyword searching that description for the word Salesforce, so that you could find a financial analyst Suddenly you look at the job description, you see Salesforce mentioned a handful of times, and what they're actually looking for a Salesforce business analyst or admin certification for this job. Why is that happening? And then once you sort of reverse engineer the job description, you realize this is a Salesforce admin or business analyst role for a company that works in the financial area, right? So it's really the same job with a different name. Because you had people landing jobs for consultancies that maybe focused on the financial sector, but they were not calling it a financial analyst. It was still a business analyst for the consultancy. It was just in the financial sector.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that's an interesting method that you guys are using. It just was making me think of like also the way that you got into Salesforce, is kind of a roundabout way. You fell into it. So now you're helping people who have decided for whatever reason that, hey, this is a path I want to take. How do you pitch Salesforce to them? Like, obviously they already have a bit of a understanding, but I assume a lot of people are coming to you that, maybe they've played around in Trailhead or you have some prerequisites for doing your program, but what's the pitch? What do you say to people who are interested in getting involved?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's pretty easy for me because I was very involved in, I'll say, finance communities, specifically financial independence communities. I got really deep into these groups that were focused on just lifestyle around finance, early retirement, things like that. And I got to see all the different things that they were doing. So I had my job and we were all spending time together, not because of our Salesforce jobs, but because we were all interested in, say, early retirement or financial independence. And so by spending time with these individuals, a lot of what they were looking for were, man, if I had a higher paying job, I could retire even earlier, right? Like I could fast track that process. I want to work more to make more, but I hate my job. Like my job is so toxic or it's backbreaking and I'm dying, literally hurting myself at work to try to make a little bit of overtime and it's horrible. Or talking to teachers and they're going, every single year we get paid the same and we're expected to do more, right? Like they just want more and more and more out of us. And the best teachers are leaving for other jobs. And now I'm surrounded by either the passionate teachers, the ones that are sticking around because they really, really, really care about what they're doing, or I'm stuck with the teachers who don't have the motivation to go search for something better. And they'll just keep coming to work because it pays the bills or whatever else. And you take that across many industries like healthcare in 2020, like those people got just blasted, right? Like they were expected to just work more and more and more. And yes, sometimes they got overtime, but sometimes they didn't. And even with overtime, you can't just work yourself to death. Like it doesn't matter. At some point, you can't just face burnout every single day. And so I think a lot of the pressures that we saw on different industries made it really easy to pitch this idea of a Salesforce career. And most of the people we talk to at Talent Stacker are actually not aware of Salesforce. So we first go and we talk to people in totally different industries. Like we'll go, I was just on a podcast, a nursing podcast last month. So this is a podcast specific to nurses and specifically labor and delivery nurses. And, we're talking to them about Salesforce careers and what's available and what these look like and how you can kind of compare it. We've talked to people in the finance space. We've talked to people in the nonprofit space. So we actually focus our energy. I know a lot of people don't do this. And I would say this is one of our sort of like bread and butter strategies as a business is that a lot of people who have training programs like ours, they sit in Salesforce communities all day long, trying to convince people who are, we call them Salesforce aware, people who are Salesforce aware to buy their program, right? And then there's this massive, massive, massive market of people who have never heard of Salesforce ever in their lives. And we call them Salesforce unaware. And we actually spend more of our time trying to find people who are Salesforce unaware to hear the message that we're sending. And so what do we say when we talk to somebody like that? Well, first of all, we're going to sound like an MLM, a scam, a sales job, something like that. That's usually what we get.
Because it sounds Salesforce. This sounds like some sort of MLM scam.
Yeah, for sure. And so that's the first thing we get is like, it's an MLM. It's called Salesforce. And it's like, okay, it's not an MLM. You've got me convinced. So it's a sales job, right? And it's like, it's neither. And I wish they would change their name, but I get why they can't at this point. But yeah, we go in and it's like, hey, you have entry-level salaries starting at $70,000. You don't need a tech background. You don't need a college degree. You actually can come in and do most of the training for free online, especially if you want the DIY approach. Salesforce actually created this platform called Trailhead where you can just learn all you want totally free online. And then, yeah, you'll have to take a certification test and that'll, cost you about $200 if you can't find a coupon code. And that is about what you're going to need from a fundamental Salesforce training perspective. We could argue that you might need another cert, so call it $400 total investment, but the rest of the investment is free from a monetary perspective. And it's really just your time and energy, which is very valuable. But A lot of people that we talk to are in hard situations. And I had a member one time tell me she had to choose her hard. And that stuck with me. I really liked that because she was like, look, learning Salesforce was not easy. Like getting on Trailhead and passing these exams was not easy. Applying for 50 jobs and getting 3 interviews and then having to actually show up for those interviews, going through simulated projects, putting a lot of my time into this. This was not easy. And she said, I would call it hard. But also my life before Salesforce was hard. I was at a dead-end job. I was getting a 3% raise every year if I was lucky. So I was on a trajectory to retire making like 70 grand. You're talking about making 70 grand out the door? First job in an ecosystem I've never worked in before. Don't have to go back to college for 4 to 6 years. I like train online for 6 months. Are you kidding me? This is like beyond easy to decide which hard thing I'm going to do. The one hard thing I could do is just stick it out and live the life I've already got. And I hate my job and it's toxic and I don't feel respected. People treat me like garbage at work. I feel like I'm giving up my body. I'm working overtime and not getting paid for it. Or I could do this other thing where I'm going to be respected at work. I'm going to be paid fairly. The income is extreme for most people's cases. I'm probably going to get to work remote too. Like what's the catch? Like that's usually what it is. It's like, well, what's the catch? Because it sounds way too good to be true. If you're in the Salesforce space, it's like anyone listening right now who has a Salesforce job, do you work from home? That's incredible for most people in the world. Do you make more than $70,000 a year? That's incredible for most people in the world. Do you feel respected at work? Are you the person who gets invited to the meetings to make the decisions? Or are you the person who someone meets and then tells you what to do afterwards? I'm betting you're the person who gets to go to the meeting, and that's because you are respected for the work that you do. Those 3 things alone are far beyond what most people in the world get to do for a career. And so, yeah, our jobs sound too good to be true. To most people, telling them what we do at work is an absolute scam. Like there's got to be a catch, but it's not. It's just what we do at work. And it's the coolest thing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And the idea between choosing hard, it just took me back to when I started my role with Titan. One of the conditions was that I had to become a Salesforce admin. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it, whatever it takes. I look on the online, I'm like, okay, there's Trailhead. I'm like, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. I don't know what I'm doing right now. I never opened Salesforce before. I had worked in other jobs and used CRMs. But they were like, yeah, it's a little different than the other CRMs you used. This is a little bit bigger than those other guys. And I start doing it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I kind of get this. And I'm going through and I'm like, okay. And then I started doing practices. I'm like, I don't understand a lot of this stuff. And I was so nervous just to even, pass that first exam without any real life experience. And I just remember sitting there and I'm doing the exam. I'm like, at some point, my boss just said, good for him. He's like, listen, you got to take it. If you fail, it's fine, but you got to take the exam. And I was really privileged to be able to do the exam as part of my job. That was awesome. But I didn't have time to do the learning and the training as part of the job. That I kind of had to do at night, or whenever I had a free moment. And then I took that exam, and then all of a sudden I was like, there's no way I passed this exam. And then I got, that final screen. It was like, you passed. I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. It was a great feeling to kind of, to get over that and to get through that. And then the most important thing is that you got to keep going, right? You just got to keep kind of getting more skills, going farther with it. And I think that's one of the really cool things, this idea of just continuous learning. I think it's just a great value in general in any industry that you got to keep learning. You can't be stale. You have to keep going. And one of the coolest things I've seen this a lot with the legal industry. People who have law firms that have been around for 20, 30 years, and they weren't really doing things in such a digital first way, right? They were using old systems, old docking systems. And somehow or another, these, guys who are in these law firms will get this idea, hey, we should, start using Salesforce. And then they get so deep in it. And I've spoken to the heads of these, medium-sized law firms where these guys it's their firm, they've been doing this for 20 years, all of a sudden basically become Salesforce super admin, consultants. And they're doing unbelievable things in an industry that's not 100%. You wouldn't think Salesforce and legal. And then they start doing incredible things. And I spoke to someone last week, also another firm, they do lots of stuff. They're moving to Salesforce. They're super excited. And the way they were thinking about how to use Salesforce was so on point without ever really touching the system. And it just goes to show you, because of that culture of the continuous learning and the growing, and there's resources available, you can get people who really are ready to just innovate and keep pushing, the envelope. And that's one of the things I just absolutely, love about the industry, the ecosystem is that value on, hey, we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop.
Yeah, you can't. right? You can't. I mean, when I started, it was what now, I guess 12, 13 years ago, which is insane. And workflow was the only, from like a declarative automation perspective, it was workflow. And then Process Builder came out. I don't know when, I think like maybe like 2015-ish, right in there. And it was incredible to switch from workflow to Process Builder. But you had to relearn everything. And about the same time, you were switching from Classic to Lightning. And there were a lot of transitions that had to be taken with just an entire interface overhaul. And then out of nowhere, they switched from Process Builder to Flow, basically. Not only switch, but tell you cannot create new process builders anymore, and you have to switch to Flow. Like, those are a lot of huge trends. And that's just one example. There are also so many features and functionality changing with every release, right? Like 3 times a year, all these releases coming out. And now the big thing we're seeing in 2024, which I meant to mention earlier, is this whole AI push from Salesforce. And for me, I'm like typical millennial. Like, I want everything like immediate. It's like, okay, like you said it, let's do it. I want to see it. And it's been slower, I think, for me at least. I'm like, come on, guys, you guys were talking about this like, I don't know, like 15, 16 months ago. Like, come on, release the stuff. And then we go to Trailhead DX and they release it, but it's only like unlimited edition and for specific groups. Like, oh man, come on, like let us all play with it. Like, we want to see the beta version. Like, at least let us use it in a sandbox or something. And so like, I'm really excited for that. I really have no doubt that there's really no doubt in my mind that probably beginning of 2025, given the pace things are moving, we'll see more general availability of some of this functionality. And my bet is that we see a lot of, basically, you're going to have to be and go back to those generic roles like admin, business analyst, developer. You're going to have to be that with a skill set of whatever the AI functionality is layered on top of that, if you really want to be in demand. And how we're going to learn that, how we're going to get our hands on that, I think is the big question. But I think the sooner you can get your hands on actual AI functionality, and I don't know that I would say that that's available today, not generally available today, but as soon as it becomes generally available for companies to start seeing actual, ROI benefits from investing in Salesforce like AI feature functionality, then I think we're going to see a massive shift in that direction. Of course, we're going to see like fully AI roles that are just dedicated to the AI side, but then hybrid roles like crazy for all the roles we know and love today, add an AI version of that. And that's going to be in demand. So I'm really excited to see that emerge because I think there's a lot there we can benefit from. But I also understand that the trust side of it, making sure that our data is protected, make sure our processes are protected, those kind of things are obviously really important. So I don't fault Salesforce for taking their time, but I'm definitely beyond ready. I was ready a year ago. I'm definitely ready now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all excited, and every event I'm at and I'm speaking to people, it's just it's at the top of all of our minds in terms of what is it going to be like, and where are we going to see that return on investment? Question for you, before we wrap up, I don't know if you're currently doing consulting projects, but if someone could bring you, like, what would be your dream project right now, like your dream Salesforce project?
So I'm not currently doing Salesforce consulting, but I'll tell you that the thing I enjoy working on are brand new implementations. I'm not a big fan of enhancements. It's funny because I've talked to people who are like, I don't want to do a new implementation, like starting from scratch. Like, I want to work with something. And like, I love fresh implementations of Salesforce. It's like that I don't even have to work in a sandbox. Like, it's awesome. Like, I just get to go straight to production and test. Like, it's a beautiful thing. Like, nobody's in there yet. It's just me. So I can build it all out. And so I really enjoy that side of things. I would probably want to help. My perfect project would be helping probably a nonprofit local to my area. They don't have to be a nonprofit, but I at least want to be aligned with their mission as a company. I've sort of gotten to that point in my career where I don't just want to do work for money. Like, I want to do, I'd rather really lean into a company so I can do the best work that would really inspire me to not just solution for something, but create the best solution for that company, and like actually go out and like ask other people, like, what would you do here? This is what I'm thinking. And like really figure out what could be the best possible outcome for this company. And the reason for that is because I've kind of gone beyond Salesforce. Also, like I enjoy marketing. I enjoy sales a little bit. But I only enjoy selling things that I really believe in, right? Like, I don't want to sell anything. I want to sell something I'm like driven to sell. Same with marketing. Like, I don't want to market stuff that, I don't want to write these like nurture evergreen email funnels for companies that I don't really want to pitch their product in an email. But I really enjoy that side of things, like email copy, writing copy, thinking about how emails can be used to create like a very scalable sales and marketing process. Like I like getting my hands dirty inside of the marketing automation platforms too now. So I think probably a nonprofit or at least a mission-driven company where I actually believe in their mission, I could help them implement Salesforce from the ground up, but then also help them with their marketing automation platforms and maybe working on the direction with their sales teams or however they earn money, this kind of thing. So yeah, I enjoy the full holistic approach, not just the technical side, but the really thinking about the front end, how we communicate with customers and those kind of things too. Yeah.
I think that's a really great place to be. And I really appreciate that you've gotten to that place in your career where you can kind of see things from that higher up perspective. Yeah. Before we wrap up, if someone's listening to this and they want to get in touch with you and they want to, learn more about Talent Stacker, where should they go?
Yeah, I would say, given that you're listening to a podcast, right, then why not on whatever you're listening to it on? Just search Salesforce for everyone. And we've got our own podcast I think you'll enjoy. If you're new to the Salesforce ecosystem, I would just check out episodes 1 through 8. Those are basically a walkthrough of how to land a Salesforce job. So episodes 1 through 8 will walk you through that. Otherwise, you can always find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Bradforce. Just search Bradley Rice also, and you'll probably find me with this like super bright orange background. And if you want to get started on your Salesforce career, just head over to talentstacker.com/now, and that will get you going with what we call our free 5-day challenge. And that is basically just 5 days of figuring out, is a Salesforce career the right fit for you?
Bradley, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining Salesforce Radio.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to hearing more episodes from you guys in the future.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Salesforce Radio. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting discussions, expert tips, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders. Stay connected with Titan, plus the power of the planet's leading CRM. See you next time.